Welcome back to the Corporate Governance Program. I'm Amir Qureshi, and we're talking with our panel about the state of corporate governance in Pakistan and ways of improving the state of our governance practices. David Monkman, before the break, we were talking about lots of different things, especially about the Code of Corporate Governance. I'd like to ask you, what do you think are the benefits that companies, especially the smaller and medium-sized enterprises, can get from adopting good governance practices?
What we see to be the large opportunity for smaller firms is to adopt more professional processes and transparency that makes benchmarking and performance measurement a more fruitful exercise. I think it's also important that we look to see the improvements in access to finance that becomes available when firms have a better pulse on the performance of the company. It also has a lot to do with the accountability and the controls that are in place for management to implement decisions that are made by owners. So to the extent it's possible, owners are seeing now that they can better oversee and delegate to a properly governed company than without the governance systems in place. I would say that the corporate governance is in some ways like investing in a brand. I think the reason why firms are reluctant to do investments in corporate governance is because they're unclear about the abstract benefits associated with investing in governance.
But there are tangible benefits. Studies show that cost of funding goes down. If you're borrowing money, the interest rate would be lower. If you're raising equity, you'll be more likely to attract equity if you have good systems.
In addition, you have less volatility in growth rates. You have more predictable performance. In part, it's because you know what your performance has been in the past and what it should be according to international competitors, perhaps, or domestic competitors. So there are lots of benefits that firms see, and again, we begin to expect larger firms to make investments in corporate governance systems first, and then they inspire their trading partners, their distributors, their vendors to make similar investments in transparency. And at some point, we begin to see a transformation of the value chain. Again, this is requiring that companies adopt longer-term thinking processes, and I'm happy to see that firms are doing that.
And Dr. Afra Sajjad, we were talking about the Code of Corporate Governance and your survey. What needs to happen to improve the overall situation? And do you think the code needs to be re-looked at now?
The code was issued in 2002. It has been more than 5 years that we have had the code. And the code, I think the intent of the code was also that it should be a dynamic document that should keep in line with the changing needs and the changing demands of the time. A lot has happened since 2002. There is much more emphasis now on having independent non-executive directors. And one of the findings and the recommendations of this survey is that instead of just saying encourage having independent non-executive directors, a comply or explain approach needs to be adopted towards the inclusion of independent non-executive directors, where either a company should either have a stipulated number of independent non-executive directors or explain why they cannot have. For example, if a company in Faistabad cannot find an independent non-executive director, it needs to be identified, and then SECP along with PICG should develop a resource pool of independent non-executive directors. Another area that this survey recommends that the code should look into is to maybe encourage companies to have remuneration committee. It is something that's becoming common and popular in many parts of the world. Since 2002, whistleblowing has become very common. So that is something that needs to be looked into. Whistleblowing mechanisms should be put into place. And the business community, as this survey reveals, is not even aware of the concept of whistleblowing. So that needs to be done. Then the importance of having independent non-executive directors on the audit committee, and especially the chair to be independent. Then training, industry, business, academia, linkages need to be developed, case studies need to be developed. So there are quite loads of things which can be looked into when people sit down to review the code.
Large number of family-owned groups in Pakistan and the cross-holding, so effectively a small number of people are involved in lots of different companies. And when we talk about the need for independent directors, there are two things. One is, I suppose, to be independent. The other one is the perception of independence. How difficult then is it to be an independent director on a board when there is only a handful of groups that are actually pretty much controlling most of these companies?
It is very difficult to identify whether a director is independent or not. The reason being that the extended family system works in Pakistan. So they would not like members who are owning, let's say, more than 10% of the share, because they are not even listed in their financial reports. If a member is owning less than 10% of the share, so it is not listed. Secondly, the extended family, the wives and cousins and uncles and others. So I think this is something that works in Pakistan. So whatever we see in the present setup in the business groups, more often you will see that they are their extended family or the very close friends. So this is how I think the current system works.
Yes, and I think in developing anything new, that's what we would need to take account of. We just need to take another short commercial break, but we'll be right back with more of the corporate governance program, so don't go away.